Hello and welcome to Money Matters TV. My name is Michael Verrill and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Development with the Sharp Financial Group. As an integrated financial management company, we work with founders and second-generation business owners to help maximize business value, increase cash flow, reduce tax liability, and help owners transition their most valuable asset to long-term family wealth and future legacy. Thank you for joining me on our continuing discussion of growth stories, where we hear from entrepreneurs and advisors sharing secrets and advice on what business owners need to know to grow. From time to time, financial matters involving life sciences, healthcare, or technology companies may be discussed on the show. Those discussions are not and should not be considered financial advice. Moreover, since the program is pre-recorded and shown at a later date, much of that discussion may no longer be relevant. You should always seek financial advice from a financial advisor before entering into any financial transaction. I'm joined today by my guest, Ryan Udell. Ryan is a partner with the law firm of White & Williams and co-chair of their corporate and securities group. Ryan has spent the last 20 plus years working with companies at all stages of growth. From early stage startups to large multinationals, Ryan has helped with capital raising, acquiring companies, and helping owners exit their business. Ryan also has extensive experience on the investor side, having worked with all types of private equity, from angel investors to growth investors to controlling interest leveraged buyouts. Ryan's insight for both legal and business perspective for companies growing at all stages of the business life cycle will prove to be helpful in our discussion today. It is my pleasure to welcome Ryan Udell to Growth Stories. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Before we get into sharing some of the client stories and some more insight for our audience about growth and companies, I was hoping that you could help answer a question from one of our viewers.
Well, I'll try my best.
Yeah, great. So we have a question from Nancy Waldron from Ardmore, and Nancy would like to know, if a securities issue with a company comes up and I try to deal with it with a company with no results, is there an organization that I can contact for help?
Yes, there is, Mike. I'm going to assume for purposes of answering this question that we're talking about a publicly traded security that's listed on an exchange. And in that case, if the company has been non-responsive, you could contact, if you purchased the security through a broker, you could contact your broker. If you have not received any positive response from the broker, you could contact one of several agencies, including the SEC or FINRA, which is a private body that governs the public markets. And in absent of all of those, what could happen is if you're looking for your security and you can't locate it, or your broker or the company can't locate it, then it's possible that the security was what's called escheated to the estate, which means the state is holding it for your safekeeping. So you could contact your state's Treasury Department to see if they have it.
Great. Well, hopefully that was helpful, Nancy, to answer that. It's always great to hear from our viewers. To send for a future show, here's how to send your questions to Money Matters.
You can have your questions answered on Money Matters. Please go to our website, money-matterstv.com. On our homepage, click on the banner on the right that says Send Us Your Questions. While you're on our website, you can find information about our host and guests, as well as show notes and links about this show and past shows. Money Matters is also available as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can listen to Money Matters while you're on the go. That website address, again, is money, M-O-N-E-Y, -matters, M-A-T-T-E-R-S, TV.com.
Welcome back. Ryan, can you start out by giving us an overview of your practice and the types of companies that you work with?
Sure. And before I get started, though, I just wanted to make since I am a lawyer, I have to make a quick disclaimer here. And the disclaimer is that we're going to have a free and open discussion today. So the opinions that I give, on our show today are those of mine and not necessarily of my firm's. With that being said, as you mentioned earlier, I'm a partner and co-chair of this corporate and securities practice at a law firm of White & Williams. we're headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we have offices from Boston to Wilmington, Delaware. So we have a northeastern footprint. The firm's been around for over 100 years, and during that period, we've been engaged in helping folks grow their businesses from the startup stage, although I assume back in the 1800s they didn't call them startups. But entrepreneurs are always entrepreneurs, so we've helped folks all the way from startup all the way through capital raising, through ultimately exiting their business or acquiring other businesses, as the case may be. Our firm is a full-service firm, which means that we have lawyers that specialize in all areas to help fit your needs as a growing business, from labor and employment to intellectual property to corporate and securities, to hopefully you'll never have to use these folks, but to bankruptcy if the need arises.
Try to avoid that.
Try to avoid that at all costs, and we'll talk
right.
about some strategies today.
Right. Well, that kind of leads me into my next question. And typically, we interview entrepreneurs on the show, and many of those entrepreneurs have successful businesses, and some more than once. But it isn't always smooth sailing from the beginning. Some of those entrepreneurs tell us about kind of the bumps and bruises along the way of early starting of the business, and also the lessons learned along the way. But I thought maybe you could give us a little insight into, if a new entrepreneur sits in your office and they've just started a business or thinking of starting a business, do you have some initial kind of guidelines or advice for that early entrepreneur to help them maybe avoid some of those lessons learned by others?
Yes, and obviously, you're still going to make mistakes along the way. It's just the part of being an entrepreneur, especially a first-time entrepreneur. That being said, what we try to counsel young companies, and I'm not saying that you're necessarily young as a person, but young companies, is that you need to basically set your priorities, and because you've got a lot to do and a little time and a little resource to do it with. So when it comes to the legal framework, and we can talk about business framework as well, but when it comes to the legal framework, what I always advise is, in the beginning, do what's minimally necessary to get your company formed and get it up and running. You don't need, quote unquote, the Cadillac of legal documents when you're just formed. That'll come later if and when you start, if your company starts growing fantastically, or if you need to take in outside capital. We'll get into that a little bit later. But you want to spend your minimal dollars wisely. So you want to become a corporation or some other limited liability entity. That's first and foremost. And the reason for that is when you start a business, there's obviously risk not only of your own capital, but also, depending on what business you're in, you could have risk from you open a business, you open a pizza shop, for example, and someone slips and falls on your pizza shop. Well, how do you mitigate that risk? Well, one way is to have a limited liability entity. The second way, and this is also equally as if not more important, is make sure that you have at least the appropriate insurance for the level of growth that you're at. And what I mean by that is you don't need every type of insurance right off the gate, but depending on what you're doing, let's say if you're doing, again, let's take the pizza shop for example, because it's an easy one. You want to have property insurance. You want to have liability insurance. If you're involved in a tech business, you may want to consider, if you're operating on the internet, to have cyber insurance. That's really important these days. The last thing that I would say is that, and the most important in my mind, is focus on doing the one thing that you set out to do and do it well. Don't try to do 8 different revenue streams at once, because if you do 8, it's sort of the old adage, if you do a lot, you're not jack of all trades, master of none. You want to be a master of what you're trying to accomplish. And then as you progress, you can add business lines. But in the beginning, you really want to focus on that one core business.
Right, and really test the market and find out if that product or service is going to resound with what customers are willing to pay for.
Exactly, and then there's a word that everybody tosses around now, pivot. That's what you do. If something's not working, you also have to be nimble enough to pivot, to make a move to something, a product or a service, or to tweak your product or service to fit what the market wants. Obviously, sometimes, and there are cases where you develop a product, and the product sets the market. Some like Apple did with the iPod and the iPhone. But in most cases, the market's going to dictate where you want to go, and so you really have to listen to the market and not be so obstinate that you can't take some constructive criticism from the market.
Do you get into those conversations with your clients? I mean, it's great working with entrepreneurs, right? Their vigor and passion for what they're doing, but sometimes they don't see the forest through the trees, if you will, and they've got a great solution that they think everybody has to have, but the reality is it's not something the market wants to pay for. How do you counsel clients that you're working with through that?
So, that's a tough call because, a lot of folks who've worked with me for a while know that I can, although I'm a lawyer, sometimes I can provide business advice. The business advice obviously is not legal advice. But, what I always suggest is don't take it from me necessarily. Take it from, there's plenty of groups out there in this day and age that will mentor you. And, what I would do is strongly try to find a mentor. The mentor is going to give you tough love from time to time, and you really have to be prepared to understand that, it may be a short-term bruise to my ego, but in the long term, that mentor is trying to do what's right for you and your business. They're not just trying to be, the Shark Tank where, they want to, lob insults at you, right?
So embarrass you on national TV.
Exactly. So they're really there because they're giving their time. So what I would strongly suggest is you find a group local to your area where there's a mentor organization and really seek that out. And it could be a formal relationship or it could be an informal relationship. Is this someone that you worked with in the past or someone else that's in your business that you look up to? I mean, all those things really, really help you. I mean, the lawyer can help as well. And I can sort of say I've seen a lot of different business plans. I've seen what's working and what doesn't work. But really, if you don't want to take it from me, take it from someone that's in the business or who has succeeded, who has gone through what you're going through and can really help you succeed.
Right. That's great advice because I think sometimes entrepreneurs feel like they're on their own,
right.
But it's nice to know that there's other opportunities for them to find a mentor or somebody they can lean on to grow the business.
Right.
I think sometimes the entrepreneurs that don't see that are the ones that maybe end up failing.
Right, and that is right. I mean, if I had to give one bit of advice is, there's a difference between healthy obstinism and non-healthy, and it's a hard line to figure out. Okay,
right.
So because you have to believe in yourself enough as an entrepreneur, you have to believe in yourself and be confident in what you're doing. It'll rub off when you try to go to market, when you try to raise money, if that's what you so choose, and so on. However, you also have to, as you pointed out, you also have to be able to listen to what people say, and if it's logical, incorporate that. Almost be a sponge.
Right, right. Yeah, like you said, it is difficult, right?
Yeah.
If you have that next great thing that's kind of on the forefront of technology, it's something nobody had ever seen before.
Right.
Maybe you're the only one that truly believes in it, but how do you balance that?
Right, and what I always say is there's and this can be applied to anything, including my business, but when you have a solution in search of a problem, then maybe it's time to look for a different business line.
Right, right. It may be a great solution, but if your goal is to build a business and find something you can make money at, then
That's
maybe
right.
you have to reconsider.
That's right.
Right. You can solve the problem once you've reached a level of success with the business. So the early stage, I think that's probably refreshing from some entrepreneurs to hear that you don't have to throw a ton of legal documents and everything together, that you can kind of scale it as you grow the business. But say you are, you've proven your product, maybe it's generated some revenue, maybe you have some early clients and you're starting to get some traction, but you really want to scale the business. So you're kind of in a different stage. What do you start thinking about then from a legal standpoint, from a business standpoint? What are some of the things your clients go through in that phase? Yeah,
and actually I just wanted to go back to and make one other point before we move on to this question, which is, the one exception to the legal spend is that if you have a technology business, okay, so if it's a life sciences business, you have a molecule. If it's a software business that has potentially patentable technology incorporated with it, if it's any other, if you've got a product that you can get a patent around, then you really do need to seek out and obtain that protection, and it's money well spent. It's not going to necessarily prohibit someone else from stealing your idea or product, but it really gives you a leg up. And also, as we get into the next question, where we're moving into a growth phase and potentially moving into a phase where we're going to seek outside investment, it'll make things a lot easier. Plus, also, and I'm not a patent lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt, if you want to sell overseas, there are strict deadlines on filing for patent protection overseas. So one thing you have to do is plan where you may want to be from a market perspective, and there are ways of drawing out the patent process so you don't have to spend a ton of money up front, but you need to sort of do that initial phase in order to preserve rights in those other jurisdictions. And so that would be the one thing that I would say is the one exception, one big exception on the legal spend side, early stage. In terms of moving towards the growth phase and how does that differ? So when you scale, your business in general, you have to think about it. Now your business may be worth something, and so you have more to lose, candidly, right? Maybe you've gotten some market acceptance. You've commercialized whatever business you're in. You really then need to look at and maybe you have some employees now. So now you have to look at, you've got all kinds of different, you don't want to go through life, because that's what you pay someone like me for. You want to go through life looking at all, as a pessimist. So you don't want to look at all the risks and see just tons of risks, because then you'll get risk paralysis or paralysis by analysis, whatever you want to call it. But what you do need to do is now pay more attention to things that I said you may be able to give a little bit more short shrift earlier on. What insurance do you have now? Okay, do you have insurance that if an employee makes a claim for discrimination or makes a claim because they've gotten hurt, do you have workers' comp insurance? Do you have employment practices insurance? At this stage, if you're commercialized on the internet, do you have cyber insurance, particularly if you're taking in people's personal information, credit card information, etc. What you don't want to have happen is after you get some success, you don't want to have a mistake ruin or bankrupt, which we talked about, the B word, your company at that stage. So starting to think about, as you scale everything else, you also have to scale your business side, your finance side, your legal side. And I think that, if you think about it as scaling like anything else, legal is just one of those components. As your profitability increases, so does what you have, your asset, what you have at risk, right? When it's a small asset or no asset or just getting started, well, the risk-reward ratio is low. When you've started to have some success, then you need to come back to us and we can talk about what it is that we want to protect. We want to protect, for example, another example. You hire employees. The employees are developing IP for you along the way. Well, what do you need? Well, you need some document, and it's pretty simple and straightforward, but you need a document that says, everything you develop for me while you're working for me is mine. And you might think, well, maybe, I thought that would be the case anyway. Well, that's not exactly right. So that's why, I think, periodically, you call up your advisor and you say, okay, here's where I am. What is it that I should be worried about at this stage of the game? And we can go on and on, but those are some examples.
Right. I guess it's kind of like kids in a way, right? Like little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems.
That's right.
As your business grows up, you got to...
Right.
We talk to our clients a lot and prospective clients about professionalizing the business, and I think that's really what you're talking about. Like, yes. And it's really a measure of like what's at stake, right? If you do develop something, a successful business that has now significant economics at stake, then you need to really start to think about how you protect it legally, how you're recording your financial information, all of that.
Right, and other things, like you said, professionalizing or even institutionalizing, you have records retention. You have more sophisticated accounting controls. You have someone that is in charge of your operations. As you grow, ultimately there's more administration, but in that you lose some of your entrepreneurial spirit. But you're nothing like a big company even at this stage. We're sort of talking about we've made a couple of bucks,
right?
But we're not talking about that we're the next GE, right? So it's as I say, and I say this to all my clients, and I think you said it first, and I think it's the best, is the scale should be appropriate for the stage or position of the life cycle of the business that you're in.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So another part of your practice is working with investors, so you have good understanding on the investment side. You start to reach some scale with your business, and then you start to realize that to fund that scale, you might need some outside equity or some additional capital to help you do that. Take us through that process a little bit. I mean, we mentioned in the beginning, angel investors, growth investors, controlled interest, leverage buyouts,
Right.
like private equity. It seems like this nebulous term that the investors have an understanding on, but business owners and entrepreneurs are kind of like, they lump it all together. So take us through some of that.
Sure. And by the way, you in the audience, you're not alone as to not understanding what private equity means. I mean, Congress doesn't understand what private equity means. So, and I'll leave that commentary to another day. But suffice it to say that, when the stage that we're at, most likely in this first sort of, I'm looking for outside capital. Okay, if you're revenue positive and potentially if you have earnings, what's open to you then is broader than what's open to you if you're just funding growth or you're pre-revenue, right? So if you're pre-revenue, the only avenue for capital is outside investors. And so let's take, as an example, two examples. We'll take a molecule company, which is a drug development company, and we'll take a software business. Now, what's available to each of those can be wildly different as we go up the chain, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So at the earliest phase, both companies would look to, first and foremost, well, who do I know? Friends and family. So I say, Mike, you want to invest in my company? And you say, yes, I'll stroke you a check. And we have a little bit of capital. And now what I've done is two things. One is I've gotten some outside money, so I've de-risked my position, meaning that, up till now it's been my sweat equity and perhaps whatever other, I've maxed out my credit cards or whatever I've done to get to this position. Now someone else believes in me from a financial perspective, so they're going to put their money and share the risk with me, which is, a good feeling. But that only gets you so far. Friends and family will get to you to a certain level, literally maybe 50, 100,000, depends on how wealthy your friends and family are. Could be more, could be less. Then, you look for what's called angel capital. Now, angel capital are basically individual investors or affiliated investors who like to invest in earlier stage companies. So in the case of both the drug development company and the software business, you will find angels that like those particular areas and will invest in, if they believe in you as the management, they believe in your technology, and if you have revenues, you likely won't have revenues on a drug development company. But in a software business, you have an earlier path to revenue, so you may have some revenues. So you would then take in some capital from angels. Now, what kind of capital do you take in? You can take in either, you can sell basically common interests, or you can sell what's called a convertible note. A convertible note, what that does is, if I say, Mike, you want to invest in my company? You say, sure. We can't excuse me, we can't agree on price. So we can't agree on price. We say, you know what, I'll give you $500,000 and it'll convert when you get a investment from a institutional investor. I say, okay, great, because we're going to be complaining about or dickering about price forever and we'll never get anywhere. So let's do that. Fine. The next stage we go to is venture capital, right? And venture capital or growth equity, depending on, and growth equity and venture capital are very similar, although they're different. They're similar in the sense that they're both there to fuel growth. Growth equity is really there to fuel earnings growth and somewhat revenue growth. Venture capital is primarily there to fuel revenue growth. And in some cases, like the drug development company, they will be taking a bet on whether or not your drug is ready to get approval in various phases of the FDA. Okay, so that when we take in that venture capital, that capital comes in, again, it's equity capital, typically comes in as a preferred security of some sort. That just means that they get paid back first. And then your money that you put in early on, that $500,000, that will get converted at the same per share price or some discount to that. So now we're at that sort of later stage in the operation, and I guess the next phase would be, and I don't know if we want to talk about Mike, and we can defer this to a next question, but doing acquisitions, doing growth with other ways, doing growth with, basically, what do we do with that capital when we have it, right?
And that may be some expectation from the investor, right? There may
Yes.
be part of the negotiation on, like, we're going to give you this money, but you got to tell us what you're going to use it for, and part of that may be acquisitions for growth.
Right, so part of that may be acquisitions for growth, part of that may be to hire salespeople to sell the product, part of that may be to hire, in the case of the drug development company, to go out and get a CRO to do some additional development and testing for the phase testing. So it really just depends. And it's really, somewhat, though, if you have something that's very interesting, you are in the driver's seat. You as the entrepreneur will say, this is what I want to use it for. And are you interested in investing?
Well, that's great. I think we could talk all day on this. I'm just real curious because we heard a lot about it, but maybe just in the last minute or two here, just talk about crowdfunding and crowdsourcing and kind of where does that fit in? Is that angel? Is that venture? Is that somewhere in between? Are you seeing companies use that?
So crowdfunding, although it was part of the Jobs Act, which was, after the financial meltdown of 2008, it came into play. It's actually only been implemented relatively recently. And I want to just contrast crowdfunding with Kickstarter and those types of things, which are not financing in the sense that you're not buying equity, you're actually just putting down an advance on a particular product. So that is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about buying equity, okay? It is still slow to get off the ground, candidly, and I think what will happen is as things progress, with this administration, I think things will loosen up a little bit, but I think that as things progress, the kinds of companies that will mainly benefit from crowdfunding and crowdsourcing are apps and things that people can understand and consumer products.
Right.
So the drug development company would not really be a good candidate for crowdfunding.
Right.
They're not going to understand the science, and if they buy something, they're just buying it because someone told them
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been great. I'm sure there's a whole bevy of legal issues to think about, all that, but that gives our audience a taste of some of the things to think about as the company's growing. The last thing I would like to say is that, first of all, thank you for joining us on Growth Stories today. We appreciate your time. And as a reminder, you can download the podcast from iTunes and Stitcher, as well as see programs on our YouTube channel and our website, money-matterstv.com. Thank you.